Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Rain, welcome back to Weapon Comparisons, and today I'm going to be doing a overview video of all of the optics in the game, and essentially the pluses and minuses of each one, what I like, what I don't like, and also to get some clarifications on certain things. So for example, let me go ahead and change my fire rate to single fire. For example, I always talk in a lot of my videos when I talk about iron sights, I talk about how clean they are, and I talk about peripheral vision. And essentially, you have your iron sight, and then to the sides of your iron sight, you have the housing. And essentially, what can happen is that that housing can get in the way of your vision when you're trying to cover 2 or 3 entrances at once. So let me go ahead and look for an example real quick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through this house and I'm going to just aim down sight on different lines of fire and essentially show you what I mean by peripheral vision. So as I come down through this through this walkway, I have a good vision of this, but you can see that there's a doorway to the right there, and if I turn slightly to the left, I no longer can see or cover that doorway or that window, this window, because the housing is blocking the viewing. So if I'm shooting at someone here, whoever's here is going to have a clean shot on me and I'm not going to be able to see them, chances are. And then the same can be said over here if I line up just the right way. It's fortunately this wall is just long enough where that doesn't matter, but if I'm here shooting someone in that room, I'm probably not going to see the person in this room. And it's things like that. Is it important? Sometimes, like it's very situational, but it can get more and more important depending on how many people you're fighting against. If you're playing domination, a game mode that has a lot of respawns and very fast-paced action, then yeah, it does matter, and you want to have some good clarity overall, not just in what you're looking at, but in everything around you. So this is another good example. I can cover this doorway, but I cannot cover this arch. So if I'm shooting at someone at this doorway, whoever's at the arch is going to have a clean shot on me, and I'm not going to see them at all because, again, of the housing. So that's what I mean about peripheral vision. Hopefully that clarifies it and gives you a better idea as to what iron sights I look for and what iron sights I think are better than others. So I don't think that this is an M16. Yeah, this is the M16 and it's the same iron sight as the M4. Same format, so I don't think this is bad. Just that you have to be doing this a lot if you're going to be covering something from left to right. But you can also always reverse your scenario and cover something from right to left. And you're going to have a little better time doing that than this way and that way. Than left to right. Just because you're not going from clarity to blind, you're going from clarity to clarity. Now, the last thing to mention, which I'll probably put earlier into this episode, is that this game is a little difficult to control recoil. And when you attach a magnified optic on your weapon, that recoil is also going to be difficult to control and keep your sights on target. So if you allow me, let's go ahead and do a quick mag dump with this 4x SU optic. 3, 2, 1. So you can see how jumpy the gun is, not just because it's a G36K, which we already established has a lot of vertical recoil, but you can see it jumped 2 or 3 times throughout that cycle. So you do want to be a little more trigger disciplined when you're using a high zoom optic like this. Reloading! Now let's go ahead and take a few burst shots at it, using controlled burst and not the actual burst fire mode. Hold on! So as you see, 2 or 3 shots is about the most you're going to get out of that gun before it starts to come out of control. So you want to be careful with what you use and what optics you use and how aggressive you're going to be when you're using said optics with setup like this. Now, of course, there's always an alternative, which is if you use a bipod and a 4 times, you should have more control. So let's go ahead and use a cleaner target. 3, 2, 1. And that definitely does make a big difference, as every shot hit the target. And I over adjusted, which is why it went down for this first 2 or 3 shots, and then I just let the recoil right back up, and then controlled it from there. So it's definitely worth using a bipod if you want to shoot at range and have a really nice and accurate long range setup where you can hold down the trigger for longer than 3 or 4 shots at a time. So I hope that gets that cleared out. So now I'm going to look at the different optics and the different sights that you can be used. So first I'm going to use the flip-up sights. This is essentially an alternative iron sight that you can use on most weapons. And it's similar to what the Alpha AK looks like, but this is what the flip-up sights look like. And you do get slightly better peripheral vision with this, but now the disadvantage is that the bars are on both sides now. So you're always going to have a blind spot regardless of whether you're covering from left to right or from right to left. And the thing is that the further you go, you can see this target here. The moment I do this, the target's invisible. So I have to keep that target within the iron sights, or I have to be here somewhere where I know that I'm not going to block the target with my iron sight. So you can see, if I look here, this guy's blind. If I look here, that guy's blind. If I look here, that guy's blind. If I look here, that guy's blind. So you can see this can be very problematic if you're trying to cover a building that has 2 or 3 windows opening at the bottom. You're just going to have a blind spot on your iron sights, and that's never a good thing. That's why I always consider the Alpha AK and a sight like this to be one of the worst. Even though you have some very good clarity on your front sight and your back sight, and you're going to see exactly what you're shooting at, you're not going to be seeing what's around the corner and what's right next to whoever you're shooting at, which is always a problem. This is the 1.5 times PKAS. I personally have never used this optic. It has the circle dot reticle, as you can see, and I think it's fine. The housing is pretty well. If you look at our targets here, I'm going to have a pretty good view of what I'm looking at. Neither of these 2 targets are going to be blocked by by the housing, which would be the circular metal around, your sight. And then same thing over here. I would have to be standing here in order to block 2 targets. It's not bad. It gives me decent range of vision if you're using picture-in-picture mode, which I will show right now. Okay, so this is with picture-in-picture on and not just the typical scoped in. But you can still see that there's not a whole lot of detail because everything else around the optic is blurred out. So either way, you can see that I'm going to have a pretty good vision regardless of what I'm looking at. So it's not a bad optic. I don't like the reticle. And the thing about a lot of these reticles is that they use the red, they're all highlighted red. And personally, I don't see red all that well. I'm not colorblind, I just don't see red all that well, especially when I'm shooting at something. But then the other thing is that the reds tend to get lost in light. So you can see here, I'm looking at the sandbag. I can see the reticle perfectly fine. And then if I stand up and look at this white wall, I barely can see the reticle. And if I'm shooting at something, that reticle's gone. That reticle may as well be invisible for me. So that's up to you, your preferences, what colors you can or cannot see. Personally, I don't like red highlighted reticles because I lose them. Overall, I do think it's a decent optic if you want to use a 1.5 times. I don't think it's perfect, I don't think it's great. I think it will do the job. Next on our list is the ×1 hollow sight, which is what this is, using the typical circle dot reticle that all these hollow sights tend to use. Again, it's also highlighted red, which is always a negative for me in particular, and it's about the same brightness or saturation as the other flip-up optic. Not flip-up, but just the previous one. So, and you see it's still lost in light areas, very light areas. It's still a decent weapon in regards to, it's still a decent optic in regards to your peripheral vision. It does have a pretty wide housing. You can see if I look here, I block 2 targets. If I look here, I block 1 target. So it can get in the way of trying to cover certain angles in certain areas. So you always want to be careful of that. I don't think it's the worst, but I do think it does require a unique style of play, or you just have to really enjoy using this style of optic to get a lot out of it. But yeah. Now this is the Cobra sight. This Cobra sight optics are typically only for the insurgent sides. Because we are at the range, essentially, I'm able to equip most attachments onto any weapon regardless which side the faction's on. But the Cobra sight is typically faction specific to the insurgent side. Again, this is highlighted red. You lose it in the daytime, you lose it in light areas. This is a great close range type of optic. I personally do not like using it at range because I don't like using negative space to tell me where my shot should be. I always like using something that's either a line or a dot. And all I have is 3 lines that point to a blank space. So it can be difficult trying to figure out where in that blank space the bullet's going to go. And that gets even more difficult if I'm aiming at a further target, because I won't know exactly where to aim. But overall, the housing is very, very minimalistic. It's very nice. This is essentially like an alternate to running an iron sight. So if you're running an Alpha LAKEY, you don't like the iron sight for reasons that I've said, then you can go ahead and grab a Cobra sight, put it on there, and you'll have way better peripheral vision than you would otherwise. So like the only downside to this Cobra sight is just the reticle, and if there was a way to change the reticle so I'd have a line, if I had a dot, if I had something to show me where center is, then I would definitely run this a lot more often than ever, because I prefer a lot of the insurgent iron sights. There's a lot of the iron sights that are in the insurgent weapons are typically better in most scenarios than the Cobra sight. So it's a great sight, it's a great optic if you really want to run one, and especially one if you want to use in co-op, because again, you can use cross-faction attachments and weapons in co-op as well. So it's a plus for that, and it's good for certain weapons. The only downside to it is that it may not be very accurate at range, or you may not be very accurate with it at range. Now, if you were like me and you're not a fan of the 1x Cobra optic, but you do want to use a 1x, you can use the 1x OKP7, which is also faction specific to the insurgent side. And that's what this looks like. And that's what this looks like. This time you got a green reticle instead of a red one, which for me I can see a little easier and cleaner, even in white backgrounds and in the sky. So this is definitely my preferred optic in regards to 1x, especially for insurgent sides. And you have negative space, but you also have a chevron that tells you pretty much exactly where the shot's going to land. And that's a lot easier to work with than just the pure plain negative space that you get from the regular Cobra sight. And that's pretty much all I have to say about this. I really, really do like it. You can see that there is not really a whole lot of peripheral obstruction. You're going to see your target and everything around that target very clearly, very cleanly. You do have the rim around it, but outside of that, that is some of the thinnest housing you're going to find in this game. And I really do prefer it for pretty much every reason that you can say. You know, I have a reliable optic, I have a thin housing, and it's not red, it's green. So it checks all the boxes for me, and this is definitely my preferred 1x optic, especially for the insurgent side. And just for the sake of comparison, looking at this area again with this optic instead of the M4 or the M16 iron sights, you can see that not only can it cover this entire doorway, I can cover the window without the optic getting in the way at all. And the same over here, I can cover these two doorways without the housing getting in the way. And then over here, I can cover the doorway and the arch, the fan, and so on very, very easily with this optic. So if you really do want a ×1 optic, or if you're somewhat of an iron sight player and you want to spice up your game a little bit, play with something that you're not used to, I would definitely prefer this optic over many of the other ones that are in this game, just overall. So let's go ahead and look at the next one.
Alright, I'm good.
Now this is the Mars optic. This is another 1x optic with a very simple dot reticle. I can tolerate this a lot more than others, but you can still see here, I lose it at light. So it's just something that I have. Perhaps that looks perfectly fine to you. For me, it looks like it's barely visible for me. So I'm always going to bring it up on red dot opticals, just on red dot optics, but get ready for that. I always prefer red dots. I always prefer dot optics because they're going to be very specific, and I can line up headshots. I can line up very precise shots with it, whereas with another optic like the Cobra sight, I'm not really going to understand where I should aim and where I should not aim. So this is nice. This is almost like a Cobra equivalent. I believe this is for the security side, but I can be wrong because I don't really use optics. I don't really run them. The only problem with this housing that I have is that there's a lot of metal underneath the optic, so it kind of does feel like you have to, I don't know, it just feels strange compared to the Cobra optic, which sits pretty low. And then you also have that piece of metal at the top, which isn't really going to block much, but like if you're looking at a 2-story building and there's a window up top, that could get in the way. So overall, I do like it. I don't have much issues with it. You can see I can almost block 2 targets. Well, there it is. I can block 2 targets with the housing. But outside of that, it's not bad. I can't really complain about it. It's probably a little too chunky for what it is, but it will do the job. So now, talking about low profile optics, this is a 1x MRO, which is very, very simplified. It's another red dot, which is always a plus for me. Still lose it in light. I see it a little better here, but I don't know if that's because the dot is overlaying on the front sight, or if it's because the green tint on the scope makes the red see better. I don't know. You do still have some housing issues because you have your adjustment knobs at the top and to the right, which do nothing in the game. They're just there for show. And because they're there for show, they can certainly block targets, like you can see here. And again, your top reticle may block a 2-story building from being able to see a top floor window. So that's always a negative. But outside of that, it's super low profile. I like this, and I would try and run it. I would probably try and run it, to be honest. Like, there's not a situation where I'm going to be blocking 2 targets unless they're that close to each other. So I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty good. I don't have any complaints about it other than those 2 outside, things that can obscure my vision. Now this is your standard 1x red dot optic. This is specific for the security side, and this is just a bigger version of that previous optic. Essentially, not only do you have the problem with the top and right side, but now you also have something on your lower right as well, which will make things difficult for trying to cover certain areas, and your right side's just going to be blind. If you were to cover that doorway, the entire section there is gone the moment I turn to the left. So So I still like it. It does have issues. Every optic's gonna have issues, but that's the downside to using this one. I like it because it's a red dot, and again, it's a red dot, and I can't see it on a white wall. So now this is a 2x hollow sight, and this is what it looks like. So it gets rid of the squarish housing for the round housing of your magnification. And it does make things easier to shoot at range, but you can kind of see a problem here. Not only can I block 2 targets at once, but also I have less information that I can see through the optic itself because of the higher magnification. So it's a bit of a trade-off. I'll be able to see my targets more clearly, but at the same time I'm going to be losing that vision of seeing multiple targets at once. It's still good. It's a nice red dot optic, as always. Circle dot optic, I guess, would be the better way to say it. I can see it. I can still see it in the light, but not by much. And if I were to look at the sky, it's just slightly more visible than invisible for me, looking at it through light areas. So always be aware of that. The housing's not going to get in the way because it's a pretty thin housing. You can block targets with it, but like I said, it's because of the zoom it has, you're not going to be able to see more than 1 or 2 targets at a time, depending on how close they are. So it's up to you to decide if you want to lose all that information to have a better shot on target. Now this is the 2x Cobra optic, which is okay. It does the same thing as the hollow sight. It's the same housing. All these, I'm pretty sure, are going to be the same housing. It does make it slightly easier to shoot with it at range, but again, it does the same exact thing. You're going to lose your peripheral vision. Not really much else to talk about. And this is your 2x red dot optic, and you lose. And this is slightly different, I think, but maybe not. But overall, it's going to be the same effect. Because it's zoomed in, you won't see a whole lot on your peripherals. So it's up to you to decide how much information you want to have and whether or not you just want an easy target on shot. If you're running, this is usually a security side specific optic, and if you want to have something that will give you some zoom, I will always prefer this one over the other 2x optics because it is a red dot. And for me, red dots are going to be easier to get headshots with and get precise shots with, especially if someone's sitting behind a car or a cover. You can still see their head, you can still pop them pretty easily. Whereas with the hollow sight or the Cobra sight, I'm not going to be able to line that shot up just as well. Now, very quick, there is a 3x optic in the game. It's called the A2 scope. This is what it looks like. And yeah, I prefer this over the red sights, over the red dot optics, and anything that's illuminated red, because it's just the black line. And you can see that not only do I get better zoom because it's the 3x, but also I'm going to know exactly where to shoot because I have actual crosshairs instead of a reticle. So I do like how this looks. However, this does not seem to be something that can be used on a lot of weapons. This one in particular is only used on the M16A2, even on the training range. So definitely, if you're going to use the A2, you want some zoom, this will probably give you the most accurate shot with a 3x, but you will lose that ability to hot swap from one target to another because of how zoomed in you are. So always be aware of that. Now this is a C79 optic. If I'm correct, this is an insurgent side optic, and although I do say that I like lines, I also said that I do not like negative space, and that's the same exact thing that happens here. I got 2 lines on the side and then an arrow pointing up to tell me where center mass is, well, not center mass, to tell me where the center of the optic is. And although I can't line up shots with it and I can still be accurate with it, I still don't like it as much because I am going to miss. I feel like I'm going to miss using this crosshair. You know, with a 4x zoom like this, I am going to see the optics, or I'm going to see the enemies and targets a lot clearer. I am going to have a better shot at them. But like I said, as always, I'm going to be losing information. So I would have to take a shot, get out of optic, line up for the next target, take a shot, drop out, line up the next target, take a shot, drop out. So it's going to be a lot of zooming in and zooming out. And yeah. This is probably my least favorite, not even my least. This is not an optic that I would want to use on a ×4. This is not my preferred ×4 optic. Now, a slightly better ×4 optic is the M150, and it uses the red ACOG. Now, what's nice about this is that it's still a crosshair because it's not illuminated. It's like just a regular crosshair. So you can see here, I can see it on a white background very easily. I can see it in the sky. I'm not going to lose it. This is going to stay lit and bright regardless of what I'm aiming at and what colors are behind the target and what wall I'm shooting at. So definitely do prefer this as a 4X. It is using that ACOG chevron sight, which I typically don't like. However, I do feel this one is lined up pretty nicely. And for sake of example, let's just go ahead and take a shot at this target. So it lines up pretty nicely. It pretty much shot more exactly where I expected it to, and it hit the target in the head. So I'm happy with this, and that's really much else. I mean, I can't complain too much about peripherals and not being able to see left to right too much on higher zoom optics. That's just the downside to using high zoom optics. You're going to be able to get a much more clear shot on your target, but you're not going to be able to see the person that's right next to him. So you'll always want to be weary of that whenever you're using a high zoom optic. Now, my preferred 4X optic is this, the SU230, and you can see it is just a typical black crosshair with a dot in the middle to add to it. So this marks both things that I prefer from my optics and from my optics. Not only do I have lines that intersect, I also have the dot that tells me where exactly center mass is, where exactly 0 is on the target on my crosshair, which allows me to just take a shot and hit exactly where I shot. So I feel a lot more confident using this as a 4X as opposed to the other two, and I would definitely prefer to run this. And if I recall correctly, this optic is also specifically used for the security side weapons, so have fun with it in co-op if you're running insurgents, or if I think domination gives you more tools as well to use across factions. So I do definitely prefer this just because of how clear I can see my targets, and because I also have the dot that tells me exactly where I'm shooting at. Now this is the 7x sniper optic. This is your typical sniper optic. I believe that's used for security side. Not many weapons can equip this. The M16 can, and the sniper rifles can. And that's about it. But this is just your typical crosshairs. You got your dots to tell you how far to shoot off. If you're actually shooting at something that far at range. And yeah, I can't complain about the 7x because it is the 7x. I can only rate it based on its crosshair, which I really do like. Now, using the Mosin, I have a 4X PU scope, which looks like this. So it's essentially, again, negative space, trying to figure out where center is. I don't prefer optics that do this. If you do, then this is the one for you. Now, what the insurgents have as a 7x is a hunting scope, which is this one. So you still get the two lines, you just don't get the fancy dots. So you do have to kind of do some guesswork if you are shooting at someone that far out of a distance. But in regards to your typical combat ranges, it's going to do the job and do it pretty well. I don't have any complaints about it. It's just a simple just a simple crosshair that does exactly what I need it to. Now in the G36K, there is a 4x ISM optic that you can put in. This is what it looks like. It's a pretty neat novelty crosshair and sight overall because it's specific to this gun. I don't not like it. I think it's pretty well. It's going to work pretty well. And it's just a nice little alternative if you want something else. However, it is a 4x, and my preferred 4x would be the SU, which you can still equip for the same amount of supply points. So it really doesn't matter. It just comes down.
Yeah, good to go.
As I get interrupted, it just comes down to personal preference, and there's your direct comparison. So now there may be other unique optics, and of course more optics to come in the future for different guns and for specific guns, like the G36K. But those cover the ones that you're typically going to see and the ones you typically are going to run into. And I kind of give you a good idea as to what I look for in optics. I usually use low magnified optics that are also somewhat able to work at long ranges as well. So things like your red dot optics and even your 2x optics can work rather well. And that pretty much covers what I need to for this video. So I hope this is informative. I hope this gave you guys a good idea as to what to expect from these different optics. And let me know what you like, what you don't like, and have fun. See you guys in the next one.